Tonight, allow yourself to rest. Let the day fall away from your shoulders. There is nothing more you need to solve right now. Nothing more you need to carry. For the next little while, you are invited into a quiet seaside village, where the air smells faintly of salt and roses, where the windows glow with soft golden light, and where a woman who spent many years being strong finally remembers what it feels like to be gentle with herself. So find a comfortable position. Let your body settle. Let your breathing become easy. And when you are ready, we will begin. The cottage stood at the edge of the village, just where the narrow road gave up trying to be a road and became a path of pale stones leading down toward the sea. It was small, with whitewashed walls, blue shutters, and a slate roof that had weathered many winters of rain and wind. A little wooden gate leaned slightly to one side, as though it had grown tired of standing straight after so many years. Beyond, it was a garden that seemed to belong more to nature than any person. There were lavender bushes along the path, their purple heads nodding sleepily in the evening breeze. There were roses climbing around the front door, soft pink and cream, their petals loose and full. There were tiny white flowers scattered in the grass like fallen stars. When Clara first saw it, she stood still for a moment, with her overnight bag in one hand and the key in the other. She had not expected to feel anything. She had booked the cottage almost without thinking, late one evening after a long week, while rain tapped against the windows of her flat, and her laptop glowed too brightly in the dark. She had told herself she only needed a few quiet days, a little air, a little sleep, a little time where nobody needed her to answer a message, remember an appointment, organize a meal, or make a decision. But now, standing outside the cottage, with the sea breathing quietly beyond the hill, she felt something loosen in her chest. Not happiness exactly. Not sadness either. Something softer. A small, tired part of her seemed to whisper, "Here, this will do. You can put things down here." Clara opened the gate and walked up the path. The key turned easily in the old blue door. Inside, the cottage was warm and dim, with low ceilings and thick stone walls. There was a sitting room with a small fireplace, 2 faded armchairs, a round wooden table, and a bookshelf that reached almost to the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of beeswax, old paper, and lavender. A lamp had been left on for her beside the window. Its light was gentle and golden. Outside, evening had begun to gather over the sea. Clara set her bag down near the stairs and stood in the middle of the room, listening. At home there was always sound. The hum of traffic, the buzz of her phone, the neighbours upstairs, the boiler clicking, a television somewhere, a reminder, a thought, a worry, another thought. Here, there was only the low hush of the sea and the occasional creak of the cottage settling into the night. She took off her coat slowly, as though she was learning how to move at a different pace. In the little kitchen, she found a loaf of brown bread wrapped in paper, a dish of butter, a jar of strawberry jam, and a note from the owner. "Welcome to Rosshaven Cottage. Tea is in the blue tin, milk is in the fridge. The sea is best at sunset. Sleep well." Clara smiled at the last line. Sleep well. It sounded so simple, almost old-fashioned, as if sleep were something one could simply receive, like a letter or a warm cup of tea. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and watched the small blue flame catch beneath it. For a few minutes, she did nothing else. She simply watched water come to life. When the tea was ready, she poured it into a chipped white mug and carried it into the sitting room. She sat in the armchair nearest the window, curled her feet under her, and looked out. The garden sloped gently down toward the lane. Beyond that were the rooftops of the village, and beyond them, the sea. The sky had turned the soft grey blue of evening. A few gulls moved like scraps of paper over the harbour. Clara wrapped both hands around the mug. She had forgotten what quiet felt like when it first arrived. At first, quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt strange. It created space, and into that space came all the things she had been too busy to feel. The tiredness, the loneliness, the small disappointments she had brushed aside, the messages she had answered with, "I'm fine." The years of being useful, capable, reliable. The years of making sure everyone else was all right. She took a slow breath. The tea was hot and sweet. "You are allowed to be tired," she said softly to herself. The words surprised her. She had not planned to say them. They seemed to have come from the cottage itself, from the old stones, from the roses at the door, from the patient sea beyond the village. You are allowed to be tired. The room grew darker. Clara rose to switch on another lamp, and as she did, her eyes moved to the bookshelf. It was the kind of shelf people left behind in holiday cottages. A mixture of old novels, cookbooks, travel guides, puzzle books, and paperbacks with cracked spines. Some had clearly been forgotten by visitors. Others looked as though they had always belonged there. Clara ran her finger along the rows. She found books about wildflowers, old maps of the coast, a collection of poems, a weathered copy of Jane Eyre, and a blue hardback with no title on the spine. She pulled it out. It was heavier than she expected. The cover was faded navy cloth, soft at the corners, with a small pressed design of a bird in flight. When she opened it, the pages gave off that lovely old book scent, dry and warm and faintly sweet. It was not a printed book. It was a notebook. The first pages were blank. Then tucked halfway through, she found an envelope. It was cream-coloured and slightly yellowed with age. There was no stamp, no address, only a name written in careful blue ink. Eleanor. Clara hesitated. It was not hers. She should put it back, she thought. And yet the envelope had been left inside a book on a cottage shelf, waiting quietly in the dark for perhaps years. It did not feel hidden. It felt as though it had been resting. She turned it over. The flap was already open. Inside was a single folded letter. Clara carried it back to the chair, sat down, and unfolded the paper with care. The handwriting was neat, but a little uneven, as if written by someone who had paused often between lines. My dearest Eleanor, if this letter has found you, then perhaps the sea has done what I could not do myself. It has brought my words back to you. I came to the cottage today. The roses are still growing around the door. I do not know how they survive the wind, but they do. They look delicate, but they are stronger than they seem. I thought of you when I saw them. Clara stopped reading for a moment. Outside, the last of the daylight rested on the cottage garden. The roses around the door shifted in the breeze. She looked back at the letter. I know I should have said more when we were young. I know I should have been braver. But life has a way of teaching courage after the moment has passed. Still, I wanted you to know this. There are some people who become part of the quiet inside us. Not loudly, not dramatically. They simply remain. Like a song remembered only at dusk. Like a light left on in a window. Like the sound of the sea at night. You were that for me. Always. The kettle in the kitchen clicked softly as it cooled. Clara read the words again. There are some people who become part of the quiet inside us. She wondered who had written the letter. A man, perhaps, or a woman. Someone old enough to understand regret, but tender enough not to let it harden them. She continued, I do not know if you ever returned to Rosehaven. I do not know if you ever stood again at the little gate or walked down to the harbour at sunset. But if you did, I hope you knew that you were loved here. Not perfectly, not loudly, but truly. And I hope more than anything that life was kind to you. I hope there were mornings when sunlight found your face. I hope there were evenings when someone made you tea. I hope you laughed often. I hope you were held when you needed holding. I hope you forgave yourself for the things you could not change. If I could give you one thing now, after all these years, it would be this. The life you lived was enough. The love you gave was enough. You were enough. Always. Thomas. Clara sat very still. The room had become almost completely dark except for the lamp beside her, and the soft orange glow beginning in the fireplace, which she had lit without much thinking while the tea brewed. The letter lay open in her lap. The life you lived was enough. The love you gave was enough. You were enough. She felt the words settle somewhere deep inside her, in a place that had been waiting for such words without knowing it. Clara was 43, not old, not young in the careless way she once had been. She was somewhere in the middle of things, though lately it had felt less like a middle and more like a long corridor lined with responsibilities. Work, family, bills, appointments, birthdays remembered, messages answered, groceries bought, smiles given when she was tired, strength gathered because strength was expected. She had not thought much about being enough. She had thought about doing enough, earning enough, helping enough, being patient enough, being attractive enough, being successful enough, being available enough. Just being enough as she was, sitting in a faded armchair in a seaside cottage with tired eyes and cooling tea, was a thought so gentle she almost did not know what to do with it. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then she held it against her chest for a moment. Thank you, Thomas, she whispered. And then, after a pause, I hope she knew. The next morning, Clara woke to pale light moving across the ceiling. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then she heard the gulls, the sea, the creak of old wood, and she remembered. Rosehaven Cottage. She had slept deeply. Not all night, but better than she had in weeks. There had been no alarm, no rush, no need to become useful before she was ready. She lay still beneath the soft white duvet and listened to the morning. Somewhere outside a gate clicked. A dog barked once. A woman laughed in the lane. Clara turned onto her side and watched the curtains breathe gently at the open window. She thought of the letter. Thomas and Eleanor, the roses, the life you lived was enough. She wondered if anyone in the village knew who they were. After breakfast, she wrapped herself in a long cardigan, put the letter carefully in the pocket, and walked down the hill toward the harbour. Rosehaven was small but not sleepy. Not exactly. It had the quiet life of a place that did not feel the need to hurry. The cottages leaned into one another along the lane, their doors painted soft colours, sage green, butter yellow, robin's egg blue. Window boxes overflowed with geraniums and trailing ivy. A tabby cat watched Clara from a sunny doorstep with the calm judgment of an old queen. At the bottom of the hill, the village opened onto a small harbour. Fishing boats rocked gently in the water. Ropes knocked against wooden posts. Nets lay in soft heaps beside a stone wall. The tide was low, and the wet sand shone like silver beneath the morning sky. There was a cafe beside the harbour with steamed up windows and a sign that read, "The Lantern Room. Tea, coffee, cakes, soup." Inside it smelt of cinnamon, coffee and warm pastry. Clara ordered tea and a slice of lemon cake from a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Staying long?" the woman asked. "Just a few days," Clara said. "I'm at Rosehaven Cottage." The woman smiled. "Ah, the Blue Door Cottage. Yes, that place is a way of keeping people longer than they plan." Clara laughed softly. "I can see why." She took a seat near the window. The tea arrived in a brown pot with a knitted cosy around it. The lemon cake was dusted with sugar and came with a small fork that looked older than the cafe itself. For a while, Clara simply watched the harbour. People came and went. Two older men argued happily about the weather. A young mother came in with the sleeping baby tucked against her chest. A woman in running clothes bought coffee to take away. A fisherman stood outside talking to a black dog as if the dog had asked an important question. Life, Clara thought, did not need to be dramatic to be beautiful. It only needed to be noticed. When the cafe grew quieter, a woman with kind eyes came over to clear a nearby table. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Oh, of course. Do you know anything about the people who used to stay at the cottage? A woman called Eleanor, maybe, or a Thomas." The woman's hand paused on a cup. "Thomas and Eleanor," she said softly. "Now there are names I haven't heard in a while." Clara sat up a little. "You knew them?" "I knew of them. My mother knew them better." She looked toward the window, as if watching memory come across the harbour. Thomas Bell was a school teacher. Eleanor Hayes came here every summer with her aunt. This would have been years and years ago, long before my time really, but Rosehaven remembers its stories. What happened to them? The woman sat down across from Clara, but only for a moment. "Well," she said, "that depends who tells you." Clara smiled. "Tell me your version." The woman glanced toward the counter, then back at Clara. They were young. They loved each other, or near enough to love that everyone could see it. But Eleanor's family wanted her elsewhere. Better prospects, they said. Thomas was steady and kind, but not wealthy, not impressive, just good. And sometimes when people are young, they mistake impressive for important. Clara looked down at her tea. Did she leave? She did. Married someone in the city, I believe. Thomas stayed, taught generations of children to read, fixed half the village's broken clocks, grew roses at the cottage for a while after his mother passed, never married. "Oh," Clara said softly. "Sad perhaps," the woman said, "but not bitter. That matters. He was not a bitter man. My mother said he had the gentlest way of making people feel they had all the time in the world." Clara touched the envelope in her pocket. "Do you know if Eleanor ever came back?" The woman smiled, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Once, maybe twice. No one is quite sure. There was a summer years later when someone saw a woman standing outside the cottage gate at dusk. She had grey in her hair by then. She stayed a long time, then left a book on the doorstep." "A blue notebook?" Clara asked. The woman's eyes widened slightly. "You found it?" Clara nodded. "There's a letter inside." The woman looked toward the harbour again. Then, perhaps it wanted to be found. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside, sunlight moved across the water in soft, broken pieces. "What should I do with it?" Clara asked. The woman smiled gently. "Maybe you should read it again tonight. Sometimes a letter is not finished the first time we read it." That evening, Clara returned to the cottage with a small bunch of flowers from the village shop, a paper bag of warm scones from the cafe, and a feeling she had not carried in a long time. Curiosity. Not the restless kind that belonged to screens and searches and endless information, but the old-fashioned kind. the kind that made the world feel full of little doors. She put the flowers in a jug on the table. She opened the windows to let in the sea air. She made tea and buttered a scone. Then, as the evening settled around the cottage, she took the letter from the blue notebook again. She read it more slowly this time. My dearest Eleanor. The words felt different now that she knew a little more. Thomas the schoolteacher. Eleanor the girl who left. The roses around the door. The book on the doorstep. Clara imagined Eleanor returning years later, older, changed by life, perhaps with children grown, perhaps with losses of her own, perhaps carrying all the things women carry without being asked. Had she stood at the gate and remembered who she had been? Had she remembered whether a different choice would have made her happier? Or had she simply come to thank the place that had once held a tender version of herself? Clara looked around the room. There were places, she thought, that kept the parts of us we had forgotten. A chair by a window, garden path, a little cafe, a stretch of sea, a book with a letter inside. She sat back and let the silence come. For the first time in a long time, it did not frighten her. Later, just before sunset, Clara walked down to the shore. The tide had come in, covering the silver sand. Small waves folded themselves gently onto the beach. The sky was the colour of peach skin and lavender, soft and glowing at the edges. She walked slowly, her hands in the pockets of her cardigan. There were a few other people on the beach. A couple strolling arm in arm. A man throwing a ball for a spaniel. A young woman standing barefoot at the edge of the water, letting the waves touch her toes. Clara found a smooth piece of driftwood and sat down. The sea breathed in. The sea breathed out. She thought about love. Not the dramatic kind from films. Not the kind with thunder and urgency and promises shouted in the rain. She thought of the quieter forms of love. The person who makes tea without asking. The friend who remembers the date you said you were worried about. The neighbour who brings in your bin. The hand resting gently on your back in a crowded room. The message that says, I saw this and thought of you. The old letter written by someone who wished after many years that another person would know they had mattered. Clara had known love in different shapes. Some had stayed, some had gone. Some had arrived almost unnoticed and disappeared the same way. But sitting beside the evening sea, she realized that love did not only belong to the young, or the lucky, or the people whose lives had gone exactly to plan. Love also belonged to those who were tired, those who were beginning again, those who had given much, those who had lost parts of themselves and were quietly finding them. And perhaps, she thought, the gentlest love begins when we stop asking life to prove we are worthy of it. The sun slipped lower. The first lights appeared in the village windows. Clara walked back up the hill slowly, pausing only to look at the cottage. The roses around the blue door glowed softly in the last light. They looked delicate, but they had survived many seasons. That night Clara did something she had not done in years. She wrote a letter. Not an email, not a message. A letter. She found a few sheets of paper in the drawer of the writing desk beneath the stairs. She sat by the window, opened the notebook to a blank page and began. Dear Thomas, I know this letter will never reach you in the usual way, but perhaps that is not the point. I found your letter to Eleanor yesterday evening. I hope you do not mind. It felt less like reading a secret, more like being handed a small lantern in the dark. I do not know if Eleanor ever read your words. I hope she did, but I want you to know that someone read them. Someone who needed them. Clara paused. The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the mantel. She continued, I came here tired in a way I did not know how to explain. Not broken, not unhappy exactly. Just tired from being strong, tired from being useful, tired from being needed and not always known. Your letter reminded me that tenderness can wait for us, that some words arrive late but still arrive in time. The roses can survive the wind. She smiled a little as she wrote that. Then she finished. So thank you for loving someone gently, for writing it down, for leaving behind proof that quiet love matters, and for reminding a stranger that she, too, is enough. With gratitude, Clara. She folded the letter and placed it inside the blue notebook behind Thomas's. For a moment she considered taking the notebook to the cafe or giving it to the cottage owner. But then she understood. Some things were not meant to be solved. Some things were meant to be kept where they could keep doing their quiet work. She returned the notebook to the shelf. The next morning was her last full day at Rosehaven. Clara woke early and walked to the harbour before breakfast. The village was still half asleep. Delivery vans moved slowly along the lane. A man swept the front step of the bakery. The air smelt of salt and fresh bread. At the water's edge, she watched the fishing boats rock gently against the ropes. She did not feel transformed. That word was too large, too bright. Real healing, she thought, was often much quieter than that. It was not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it was a cup of tea by a window, a letter in an old book, a walk beside the sea, a sentence that stayed with you. You were enough. Always. She bought bread from the bakery and strawberries from a little market stall. She had breakfast in the cottage garden with the roses above her and the sea glittering behind the rooftops. For once, she did not make a list. She did not check her messages. She did not measure the day by what she completed. She simply let the morning be a morning. Later, she visited the small church at the top of the hill. Not because she was especially religious, but because the door was open and the building looked peaceful. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of stone and flowers. Coloured lights fell through the stained glass windows onto the floor. She sat in the back pew. There was no one else there. She thought of all the women who had sat in quiet places like this through the years. Women who had prayed, hoped, grieved, waited, forgiven, worried, loved, and begun again. Young women, older women, mothers, daughters, wives, widows. Women who had chosen one life and wondered about another. Women who had looked after everyone. Women who had forgotten to look after themselves. Clara closed her eyes. For a few moments she imagined placing all her burdens beside her on the wooden pew. Her worry, her tiredness, her old regrets, her fear that time was passing too quickly, her fear that she had not become everything she once imagined. One by one she set them down. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. The church was quiet enough to hold them. When she opened her eyes, the coloured light had shifted slightly. A patch of blue rested across her hands. She breathed it in. She breathed it out. And she felt not fixed, but less alone. On her final evening, Clara returned to the Lantern Room Cafe. The woman with kind eyes was wiping the counter. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes." Did Rosehaven do its work? Clara smiled. "I think it started something. That's usually enough." Clara ordered soup and bread and sat near the window again. The harbour outside was wrapped in evening mist. Lights shimmered on the water. Somewhere nearby, someone played the radio softly, an old song drifting in and out with the sound of cups and conversation. When she had finished eating, the woman came over with the small brown envelope. "What's this?" Clara asked. "Something my mother kept. Thought you might like to see it." Inside was a photograph. It was black and white, creased at the corners. A young man stood beside the gate of Rosehaven Cottage. He was tall, a little serious, with kind eyes and one hand resting on the crooked wooden gate. Beside him stood a young woman in a summer dress, laughing at something just outside the frame. Behind them, roses climbed around the door. Clara looked at the photograph for a long time. "Thomas and Eleanor." The woman nodded. "They look happy," Clara said. "They were, I think, for that moment, and that matters too." Clara traced the edge of the photograph with her finger. For that moment, yes. Perhaps not every beautiful thing was meant to last forever in the same form. Perhaps some things mattered because they had existed at all. A summer, a letter, a look, a kindness, a version of yourself you once were, a version you might still become. "Would you like to keep it?" the woman asked. Clara shook her head gently. "No, I think it belongs here." The woman smiled. "I thought you might say that." When Clara walked back to the cottage, the village was glowing. Windows shone with lamplight. The sky was deep blue. The first stars appeared above the rooftops. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, a child was being called indoors. Somewhere, behind one of the warm windows, someone was making tea. The world felt ordinary, beautifully ordinary. At the cottage, Clara packed most of her things, then made one final cup of tea and sat in the armchair by the window. The blue notebook was back on the shelf. She did not take it down again. She did not need to. The words were already with her. The life you lived was enough. The love you gave was enough. You were enough. Always. She looked out at the garden. The roses moved gently in the night air. Tomorrow she would go home. There would be emails, laundry, appointments, questions, traffic, people who needed things. Life would not suddenly become simple. But Clara understood something now. She did not have to wait for life to become simple before she was allowed to rest. She did not have to earn tenderness. She did not have to be useful every moment. She could make tea in the evening and drink it slowly. She could take walks without counting steps. She could leave some messages until morning. She could buy herself flowers. She could begin again in small ways. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but gently. And perhaps gently was enough. The fire burnt low. The cottage grew quiet around her. Clara rested her head against the back of the chair and closed her eyes. In the distance, the sea moved in the dark, steady and endlessly, breathing against the shore, in and out, in and out, the way it had breathed for Thomas, for Eleanor, for all the women who had come to the sea carrying things they could not name, for Clara, for anyone who needed it just for a while to put the world down. The next morning before leaving, Clara stood at the blue door with her bag beside her. She looked once more at the room, the armchair, the fireplace, the bookshelf, the little table, the lamp by the window. Then she walked to the shelf and touched the spine of the blue notebook. "Goodbye," she whispered. Outside, the air was fresh and bright. The roses around the door were wet with dew. At the gate, Clara turned and looked back. For a moment, she imagined Eleanor standing there years ago, with grey in her hair, holding a book against her chest. She imagined Thomas at the doorway, young and hopeful. She imagined all the visitors who had come and gone, each leaving something behind, even if only a sigh, a thought, a little less sadness than they arrived with. Then Clara opened the gate and stepped onto the lane. As she walked down toward the village, she felt the envelope of her own life still full of unwritten pages. Not empty, not too late, not finished, just waiting. At the harbour, she stopped for one last cup of tea at the Lantern Room. The woman with the kind eyes wrapped 2 scones in paper for her journey and pressed them into her hands. For later, she said. Thank you, Clara replied. Come back sometime. I think I will, and she meant it. When the bus arrived at the top of the village road, Clara climbed aboard and took a seat by the window. As it pulled away, Rosehaven slipped slowly behind her. The harbour, the cafe, the blue doors, the cottages, the little church on the hill, and finally, the white cottage at the end of the lane, half hidden by roses. The sea flashed silver in the morning light. Clara leaned her head against the glass. She thought again of Thomas's letter, and now another sentence came with it. One she had written herself. Tenderness can wait for us. The bus turned inland. The sea disappeared from view, but Clara carried its rhythm with her. In and out. In and out. Somewhere behind her, in a small white cottage by the sea, a blue notebook rested quietly on a shelf, holding 2 letters now. One from Thomas, one from Clara. And perhaps one day, another woman would arrive tired at the cottage door. She would set down her bag, make tea in the little kitchen, sit beside the window as evening gathered over the sea, and find the notebook waiting. Perhaps she would open it. Perhaps she would read. Perhaps the words would come to her at exactly the right time. The life you lived was enough. The love you gave was enough. You were enough. Always. And perhaps she could close her eyes, listen to the sea, and remember that she too was allowed to rest. And the cottage would hold her, and the roses would move softly in the wind, and the night would come down gently over Rosehaven, blue and silver and full of peace. And now, as Clara's story settles into the quiet, allow yourself to settle too. There's nothing more you need to do tonight. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest. Let your breathing become slow and easy, like the sea moving gently against the shore. In and out. In and out. You have carried enough today. You have done enough. You are enough. And now you must rest. Sleep well.